And let's talk about how fun it is to be queer in dance spaces.
Ah,
Work!
yes. Yeah, it is fun. I mean, it's
So fun.
part of why I went into the dance world that I did was because I was looking for a place where I could be myself.
Me too.
My name is Miguel Gutierrez, and I live in the unceded lands of the Lenape people in an area that is currently referred to as Brooklyn. My pronouns are he, him, his.
My name is Garen Scribner, and I am in the land of the Massachusetts people, which we call Cambridge. My pronouns are he, him, his.
So I'm an artist. I primarily work as a performing artist. Um, I create dance-based performances, but I am also a writer. I'm also a music maker, a singer. I also recently have started making more visual art. So would say probably the more appropriate thing for me to say is that I'm an interdisciplinary artist with a focus on dance and choreography. Um, but sort of making work in a legacy and a line of experimental artists, and also referring to mind body practices, somatic practices, ecstatic practice, social practice, political practice. So there's lots of different kinds of lines of influence for the work. Um, yeah, then I am also an educator. I work a lot in universities, but also outside of universities at different teaching institutions.
Currently, I'm a graduate student, so I'm sitting all day, and that's why I need help with my spine and my body. I need to be unlocked. Um, I was, I really do need a better chair. I need a better system. But I'm a graduate student at the Harvard Kennedy School, and I'm getting a Master of Public Administration. And so I'm living here for this year doing my graduate work. Before that, I'm a dancer. I grew up dancing since I was 7 years old in the ballet studio. I went to the North Carolina School of the Arts for high school, and then I joined the San Francisco Ballet when I was 18. I danced there for 10 years and was able to work with some great choreographers and amazing dancers and learn from the administrative side just as much because I really wanted to eventually help choreographers, artists like Miguel, like you, really because I have no choreographic skill at all. I identify as an artist, but more because I am part of artistic practice, but not because I'm a maker necessarily. Um, I went on to join the Netherlands Dance Theater and work with kind of another group of choreographers in Europe. And then I moved to New York and did An American in Paris on Broadway, some other musical theater things, and then kind of was a freelance artist for the past 4 years. Did some opera, did some downtown stuff. I performed Jack Ferver's work, did a bunch of stuff, some arts programming for PBS, which is where I kind of started to produce and host and do a bunch of fun things, which led me to this program here. And I'm learning about public policy, I'm learning about development and fundraising, and a slew of other topics, which I hope will come in handy moving into potentially a leadership role in a nonprofit performing arts organization to help cultivate the next generation and support the work of artists I believe in. Do you have any specific moments or memories that stand out when the wool was kind of pulled from your eyes, and maybe it was over time, but do you have any anecdotes of moments of, sort of realization that you could share?
Realization to like what it meant to be an artist.
And the realities of the business and
Mm,
talking about the
yeah.
finances of it all too.
Well, I think I kind of always somewhat felt that there was precarity in dance because when I was a kid, my parents were so resistant to me doing it. You know, my parents are
Mm.
immigrants from South America, from Colombia, and you know, it was absolutely not their intention for me to do art. You know, they were like, no, 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 you're going to be like a professional of some kind, lawyer, engineer, you know, doctor, whatever. And I leaned hard into art early. And so I think one of the big sort of anxieties, aside from sexuality and their fear of my sexuality, was their fear that I would have like no way to live, that I wouldn't be able to make a living. So I think I was always aware of that. And then I think that when I realized that the particular corner of dance and performance that I was interested in was kind of obscure or weird, experimental work or contemporary work. Um, I remember thinking like, okay, well, this is the thing I want to do, and I'm going to do everything I can to make it happen. But I'm not making, like, I wasn't assuming that that was going to be how I lived. Like that was like I knew that I was going to have to work. I had been working since I was a kid anyway, so it wasn't that was a surprise. I think that there was a moment when I went to the National Performance Network conference in 2006, and I performed a solo of mine called Retrospective Exhibitionist there, which had been supported by that organization. And then I saw a lot of the other work that the organization had supported. And I saw kind of just how weird my work was in relationship to some of the other stuff. That was definitely a moment where I suddenly was like, oh, I mean, there was both the aesthetic sense of like, oh, okay, this is why people react to the work I'm doing. But also there was the financial thing of like, how the way that, again, like I said, this sense of like that I'm going to have to justify the value and the existence of this approach to making performance and dance.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess there was frustration for me, for sure. But I was also like, okay, that's what it is. Like it didn't mean that I was like, okay, now I'm gonna make really different kinds of work as a result. You
Mm-hmm.
know. How about you though?
So I think I came at it from a different angle, and my parents were supportive of me dancing, and I didn't come out until later, until I was about 20, and so that wasn't as much of an issue on the outside. They were supportive of me dancing, but it was sort of like, but you're going to go to college and get a real job. And it wasn't until, and I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And, I was hoping that I could get into a company, managed to do that. And I think when I started to get a paycheck, that was okay. And I was able to support myself. That's when they were like, oh, okay. Even in our own internal family structure, the financial, um, kind of security was proof that this was a legitimate
Yeah.
career path in a way, and it wasn't just my parents; it's a broader sense of the family too. And I had so much privilege in that space too because I joined a big company that was really well funded, and we did work that was wonderful, but we're not talking about the kind of work that you fell into and really
Sure.
fell in love with
Yeah.
a more kind of counterculture, asking bigger questions, grittier, um, if you will, genre of the work. And I started to see while I was there the things that got lots of funding. And those were the big, beautiful, full length story ballets that would sell tickets, that made no one uncomfortable, that made no one question the reality. And I had a craving to do the work to perform work with people who were doing what I thought was really exciting,
Mm.
more punk, interesting work. And that's what led me to Europe.
Yeah.
And even then, I was still working with a very privileged company, a very well funded company. And so I just realized I sort of traded places, but I wasn't on the ground level of any of that work. I wasn't performing in the kitchen. I wasn't performing, in those downtown, super downtown, um, all around town Julie Brown performances. I was still, in the opera house. And
But
then I
there's a
went to Broadway and did an even more,
sure. Then
went
it's
to
like, whoa.
commercial theater. I go full sellout, which I loved and it was great. And was able to make money and buy a home, and which I'd never really been able to do before. And then only for the past 4 years before I started this grad program did I really start to see first of all, living this freelance life where I had to think about how I'm going to get paid from week to week. And it's really hard.
Yeah.
So when you're living outside of those systems, well, first of all, you don't see it unless you are.
Sure.
And so you could live your whole life in one of these larger companies or with shows, go show to show to show, and you never see and experience what that's like. So I think for me it was gradual, and I just had a very different experience than you. And so I now feel a sense of responsibility to figure out ways to increase people's access to the work, and also, more importantly, figure out if the work itself does help people, if it, or if it's actually created in a way that is so elitist, that is so created for the 17th century courts of Italy and France, that we can't change it enough. I don't believe that. I think we can, but it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take more than diversity statements from these big companies and hiring choreographers of color only. I mean, we have to look at the underlying sets of values and beliefs of these places, and sort of, I think, disentangle some of the historic uh, issues therein.
Yeah, I mean, I
Where do
think
we
that,
start, Miguel?
well, something that you said, I mean, you know, you went to NDT, and I do think it's important to acknowledge that, at least in a lot of places in Europe, scale doesn't necessarily translate to being conservative, you know, and I think unfortunately in the US that does happen, where the larger the scale gets, sometimes the more conservative the work has to be. It's a general statement, it's not always true, but it's you know, the bigger the stakes are, you know, I mean, it's not an accident we have a lot of jukebox musicals on Broadway, right? It's because they're sort of tried and true. You know, we know that, like, okay, people know this, they love it, they're going to walk in loving it, great, you know, and a lot of them can be really great and a lot of them can be dumb, but it has to do with like a tested product, right? And like people don't want to put a lot of money into an untested product, and that's true. And a lot of our commercial entertainment systems in the US, Hollywood, Broadway, are the two prime examples of them. And every now and then something breaks through, like a Fun Home, or like I don't know, whatever
Mm-hmm.
the heck, kind of, you know, there's all kinds of movies that break through. But um I think, whereas, you know, and I've experienced this as well, having worked in Western Europe a fair amount, because I think it's different in different parts of Europe, um, where, yeah, you can be on those large stages doing kind of a thing that would be considered sort of crazy, or, you know, risky, or too dangerous, whatever, for the same kind of stage in the United States. And so I think that's really when you, I mean, back to this, like, when was the wool pulled out under my eyes? It's like, I suddenly, like, somewhere along my path, I was like, you know, it doesn't really almost matter the scale. Like, the work could be good, the work could be terrible, the work could be experimental, the work could be very boring. Like, and it can happen kind of at any scale, really. And it's really kind of just our fears or our expectations or all these kinds of notions of propriety that kind of get in the way. And so I feel like that speaks to a lot of why things are considered, art is considered elitist in this country, is like there's a way in which we have come up in a society that has forced it almost to become elitist, because there is so much fear around the individuality of ideas, and, you know, radical ideas, or the idea that, like, you know, somebody would make something that isn't happy or that doesn't make everybody feel good, that's just considered so, like, against the American value system, which is about, like, everyone has to be happy
Mm-hmm.
all the time, you know, even though we know that this is an illusion, and that many people in society, in American society, are not happy or not doing well. Um, so it's art becomes sort of this aspirational thing, but then it also becomes like this elitist thing. And I mean, I think that's, personally, I feel like that's a very political thing. There's really political reasons why that's the case here. Um, because if you have a kind of engaged, fully supported, and really, like, diverse, and outspoken citizenry, then that can be considered a dangerous thing by certain repressive forces. So instead, let's push art, let's make it very exclusive, so then we can just criticize it for being exclusive, and we don't actually have to talk about what the art is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's happened in this country, because if you
Mm-hmm.
try to like bring art into schools, or, you know, art is the first thing that gets cut from any public school program, right, from
It's
the
always
budget,
extra. Yeah.
always the extracurricular thing, you know, or it's always the most sort of like frivolous part of society. And then if you decide to soldier on with it, you're just considered a sort of elitist snob who's not speaking to the needs of the people. But I don't know, that makes me just feel so angry, because I feel like that's a total strategy that's happened here. It's not true. It's just been the strategy.
Yeah. I mean, the reality too is that most of these larger nonprofit organizations are run, I mean, they're run by boards. The boards make the decision, the boards are the ones who are paying for the work. And so, if that's how it is, in a way, that's how it will be unless something shifts there. I mean, whose name is on the building? What does that mean? What is the symbolism there? And in our country, I think we have a lot of there's a lot of precedent around things being named after people who've done some really questionable things along the way. And let's talk about how fun it is to be queer in dance spaces.
Wow.
Work!
Yes. Yeah, it is fun. I mean, it's
So fun.
part of why I went into the dance world that I did was because I was looking for a place where I could be myself.
Me too.
I mean, absolutely. Like, and
Yeah.
it's part of why I didn't pursue certain things like, more commercial work at the time because I didn't necessarily feel like that would be the space where I could be myself then, right? I mean, this is like one time about the '90s, it was long time ago now. Um, but I was really lucky to find I was also in San Francisco, at the beginning of my dance career, probably a little before you. And
With Joe Good, right?
yeah, I danced with Joe Good, who was very
Yeah.
out person,
Yeah.
making work about his identity, but also just about society and, making work with words, like talking on stage and talking about these things. And it was the first time I saw work like that where I realized you could be talking about ideas and it didn't have to be about like entertainment in the traditional Broadway sense. And that just affected everything. I was able to be myself from the moment I stepped into that studio. Not only was I able to be myself, he wanted that. Like he was sort of drawing that out of me. And I think that was just, I don't know. I just pretty much, the experiences you have young really imprint themselves on you. And I just felt like, well, if I can't be this way in everything that I do from now on, then there's no point in doing it.
Oh, I wish I'd figured that out as early as you did.
Oh,
So and again, because of the spaces that I was working in, I felt a humongous pressure to fit into a heteronormative model. And you'd think, and I think most people who've never really been around dance companies and the dance studio is that, people think, oh, it must be the most like friendly space. You can be who you are. There's so many gay people there. It's kind of sort of like, not really.
mm,
Yes and no. And in a lot of ways, I felt just as much homophobia in those large dance institutions that I did outside of them. And I mean, on multiple occasions, teachers, coaches being like, you should really butch it up, or like, don't tell anybody you're gay. Don't tell this choreographer you're gay. They don't really like, they don't cast gay people, and they don't like femme people. So just like, you know, or doing a character role. Like I remember there's kind of fancy character named Gamache in Don Quixote, in the full Don Quixote, and he's the suitor for Kitri, and he's sort of this fancy guy, and he wears all these, he's rich, and he's meant to court her, and he wants to marry Kitri, and he rides in on a donkey, a real life donkey, backwards. He's a total goof, and the way I was playing him, my director was like, he's not gay, he's just fancy, and I was like, oh, well, mine is. I was like, mine is. This is, and so, but no one had ever. Everybody kind of would be like, oh, okay, cool. So we're just not going to talk about that. And people saying, you won't get promoted. Like you won't get promoted. Your career is going to be affected. And we're not talking about in the 80s and 90s. We're talking about in the early aughts. And so, it took me a while from that space to kind of deconstruct and really find my own space. And, but it was certainly a journey. And I think even today, I mean, I'm teaching, so I teach at the Boston Ballet. I teach the 14 to 18-year-old boys, and I've seen some amazing growth, and they're expressive, and we don't talk about male and female energy. We talk about sun and moon energy, and the ballet is actually doing some really amazing stuff around idea work. But even still, I feel that these boys have been certainly marginalized in their at-home schools and studios, and but they do find safety in the dance studio, and that's what I found too. I was bullied as a little kid in 1990s Virginia as a gay kid, and beaten up, and I did find safety in dance, and I found teachers who were like, you're good at this, and encouraged me. And while I had a lot of privilege, I also feel that I hid a lot of myself for many, many
mm,
years.
mm.
and had to unravel my own trauma and my own journey of self-realization over time, and I'm working on it every day.
Well, I think it also speaks to how forms are political, or like
Mm-hmm.
certain genres of the same medium can have different value systems, right? It's like you tell again, you're in dance, I'm in dance, but we've had really different experiences. We've been in different forms of the form. And it's, it's crazy to me to imagine homophobia in a ballet company, given the fact that like just to think like everything about it is so like frilly and like flamboyant, and
Totally.
the entire medium itself is seems like it's built on queerness, and it's also like been upholded over time by a ballet main audience, which is very very much a gay male audience. So it just seems so like so insanely hypocritical that you would have to have gone through all those horrible experiences that are really
But
abusive.
I know, and you'd think, but honestly, like I'm thinking about the fans and the people who paid for it, the board members, and I couldn't even name, like, I could maybe name two out of the 100 board members who were queer.
Oh wow.
Most are straight and white and male who were part
Yeah.
of the executive leadership back then.
Well, that's because of like that level of ballet company is not so much even an expression of sexuality; it's an expression of class. I
It's yeah,
mean, and which is tied to race, right? I mean,
that's right.
I think those kind of scales of companies are about money because they have to be. Because how else can you run a company with like 40 plus? I mean, I don't know how many people are in SF Ballet.
70 dancers.
I mean,
It's huge. Can you
that's
imagine? I know.
insane. That's like I can't even believe. Wow, I can't even imagine that. So yeah, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
doing the math in my head, and it's like, well, I know already the budget has to be X amount millions per year for that to even function. So again,
Yeah,
right? It's like scale equals conservatism in this country so often,
that's
right?
right.
It's like money, it's tied, it's not an accident that people with money don't want regulation
Yeah.
because they would not be able to have all their money, right? So, and I've come up in dance worlds, not to say like it's untethered from class, because it's not. It is very much. There's a lot of privilege in experimental dance, but definitely I would say the people that I was drawn to, or the histories that I've been drawn to, are those histories where people were questioning all those things, or who had you know, come to the forum with questions about their, sexuality or race
Mhm.
or identity, that were aggressive and really formed. Because also because of my age, a lot of the things that were influencing me were coming out of like the first wave of the AIDS epidemic.
Mm.
Um, which had an extraordinary impact in all kinds of ways. It was, obviously decimated a whole population of people, but it also was what elevated the voice of queer people to a fever pitch, right? And I kind of rode that wave of art making and people and thinkers, and kind of just like swam with it, and have swum with it ever since. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you can come sometime.
Yay. No, I just can't think. I think about AIDS all the time, and the like I said before, the mentors that we lost. With this whole generation of family that we will never know,
Yeah.
and that's devastating.
It's really insane. I mean, and also just to sort of remind people, it's like, for all the drama we're having right now with COVID, which is terrible, and there's been this massive amount of death from it, but at least there was like this incredible push towards creating a vaccine and all
Yeah,
this energy, and of course, and as much as we, there were all these sort of problems with it, whereas versus AIDS, which like wasn't named by the president for 7 years, publicly, and where
right.
there has only recently been movement towards thinking about the possibility of a vaccine against HIV, right? So this is
Yeah,
like coming, 40 years after the sort
yeah,
of public knowledge of AIDS versus, 18 months, right? So it's just
yeah.
shows you kind of where the priorities of any given country are.
Right. And it also shows the it makes me think of Larry Kramer and ACT UP and the work of, you know, groups of people on the ground who can make change, who can make waves, and can encourage others to rise up. So I think, I mean, in a lot of ways, that is the job, the call to action for a lot of artists to be able to um, mobilize people through the work. And so I think that leads us to the next part of this, which is what's next? How can we do it better? And what's coming to mind for you of what comes now?
Well, I think it's interesting to have just evoked ACT UP in relationship to that question, because I think something that we're really encountering now is how much resistance people have to change. And, you know, ACT UP wasn't loved by the people whose situations they disrupted. ACT UP wasn't even necessarily embraced by the entire gay community, right? There were always people who were like, "You guys are being too disruptive. You're being too loud. You're being too this." Which is a lot of what I feel like people involved in BLM now encounter, or in all kinds of countercultural or even just activist groups. They don't have to be countercultural. They're labeled and vilified, and as you just said, it's precisely the movement and the dedication of people who are willing to be unpopular in the public eye, who have then been the change makers. Um, and I think that sometimes, again, what confuses me now is how change making is assigned exclusively to some idea of like this inspirational, put a quote of theirs on the wall kind of a person, which can happen, absolutely. But sometimes the change maker is that person who says the thing that you like don't want to hear. And so I what happens now I feel like is tricky, because I you know I I drove across country last year and with my partner, and he's black, I'm Latinx, and we were really struck by how uncomfortable we felt in so many places. Um,
We did too. My partner and I, he and I drove across 3 times. Yeah.
and I think it just kind of I'll be honest, it led me to feeling really like confused, because I think sometimes as an artist, you make your work and you think, well, I want this work to go to anybody who wants it, everyone who wants it, or I want it to reach across divides, blah, 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 this whole kind of like speak. And then I did that drive and I was like, I don't think that my work is for a lot of people. Like, I was like, maybe my work is really just for like this particular crowd of people that are just interested in this, strange, like whatever. I call it strange. I don't think it's that strange what I do, but like the particularities of what I do, right? And so I guess what that means for me is like get close to your people, like find your people, and that and like hold them close, and support each other. I mean, that's what I think is the best thing that we can do now, is to take care of those in need in our own like people set, community set, right? um I like to complain publicly. Like, I've made it part of my mission as an artist to be that person who's critical out loud, not just behind closed doors, because I really feel like I want to I don't want to be that person who's bitter at home and just bleh. I'm like, if I'm going to feel frustrated about something, it needs to be something I can activate into change, or at least expression. I don't want to say something about someone's work that I'm not courageous enough to say to their face. That's not the kind of person I want to be. So there's also something for me there about thinking through like the way that we privately complain about things sometimes, or we think that just publicly, putting them on social media is like doing something, and I'm like, that's not the same as truly building meaningful conversations with maybe just like-minded people. Again, like, I'm not here to say like I want to be in a uh, you know case study of like me and a bunch of supporters of the previous president like sitting in a room together, because like I don't know if that's going to mean anything for them, and it'd be a waste of time for both of us. So but still, it's something about that thing of like finding your people, but then also activating challenging conversations.
Yeah. I think there's one thing. I'm just have this vision of you two driving across the country, and I think of Tu Wong Fu, and I'm really hoping you were in a convertible and you had handkerchiefs on your heads. We didn't. We were in a Prius, a 2001 Toyota Prius. We barely made it. It's like a Flintstones car.
Mm.
Anyhow, in thinking about your feeling of connection to those people and wondering like, are these are not my people, is my work for these people, I would push back on you just a little bit to say that I think as a deviant, as a positive deviant in a way, and a sort of a person who brings the other side of the conversation, that those people are there and they will find your work. And so
Sure.
sometimes I think artists find that putting their work out at the void and Instagram or wherever it ends up, they will find you and they
Yeah.
have found you and they
No,
do,
that's
and
a
that's
good
so
point.
beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
I see so much uh, I see so much hope in that. I really do. One thing I wanted to ask you about, really just curious on your take. This isn't on our little list, so it's a wild card. Get ready.
I'm ready.
Um, One of the things that I'm really interested is, okay, right, what does art mean to people? What has it meant? Can it mean something else to people? But specifically, what are your thoughts about? Because I think I know that the biggest challenge facing our generation is climate change. It's it's emergent. It's real. It's really scary. And I wonder about the power. COP26 is happening right now. 60,000 people flew to Glasgow in many private planes to get there. We don't get it. Like we're not getting it. Um, and I wonder about the power of storytelling and the power of dance and the performing arts to actually elicit and catalyze real change for this specific cause. I'm just curious of what your thoughts are around it.
I mean, I don't think a dance saves a tree necessarily, unless it's like literally done around the tree while the bulldozer's there to, tear it down. Then it does maybe save the tree. I just think that what art can do is just keep you sensitive to the world. So I don't, again, I just don't have that. It's not because I'm cynical, although I can be, but I think that if you want, like, for the climate to to not continue to just warm and kill us, then you have to put your attention to that in a really specific way, because it's not an abstract concept. It's a really clear, policy driven, greed driven reality. You have to find the politicians in your district, in your state, who are supporting harmful industries, and you have to fight to get those people out of office and bring in other people, and while at the same time educating people about the values of why we have to change. It's really tough. I don't know that I look to dance to do that work. What I do think, though, it's not an accident to me that a lot of people who are artists or who make art are incredibly thoughtful, sensitive people, because we are really tapped into looking at the world around us and seeing what needs to change. And so some people maybe make work that's directly about that. Some people maybe make more abstract work. Like I said, I don't know that any one of those pieces immediately does something. And I don't personally believe that it necessarily should have to. But what I do think, other than like, how was it made, right? Like, if it's like, if I was like going to make a dance and decided to like, burn 15 diesel trucks at the show as part of the piece, I may need to rethink my work, right? So there's the reality of, and that in that, you could argue that like touring is essentially doing that, right? So you have to kind of be thoughtful about that. But again, what I think is just, um, good work just makes you, like, wakes you up, keeps you alive to yourself, and people who are alive to themselves are the people who change the world. So that to me is how that's how that
Hey, be
equation
alive to yourself. I
happens.
like that.
Yeah,
I'm
like
feeling that.
but like what that person, that can go into so many different directions. It can be an activist direction, or it can just be about like, you're a really good family member, or or you're just good at taking care of people, or I don't know. I mean, so that's how that's how I feel about it. I sometimes personally feel that art is asked to take on the work that that the public sector should be doing, that the government sector should be doing, that, because of politics's sort of like ignorance of these issues, it's sometimes fallen to social justice communities, and then as a result artistic communities, to take up the slack. But like, I don't have the resources that the government has to make those decisions, and I can be like all day long, which many of us can be and are, but I can't, stop the production of, emissions with a signature that I do. But there are people who can. So I feel like it's on us to sort of stay awake and alive, to hold those people accountable to what they're doing and not doing.
So, Miguel Gutierrez for public office. You heard it here first.
No, I would not.
See you at the polls.
I'm too mean. I wouldn't want to be in public.
You're too mean. Oh my God. We don't have time to go there. You're wonderful. This has been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Garen. Thank you so much.
Good talking with you.
Good talking with you too.